Karina Govindji here today. We're at our first Gender Smart Talk, where we actually have a real guest, which is really exciting. Normally we share experiences, and today we have someone here who is very experienced, and I'm very excited to have her. Let me first introduce myself though. See, I'm Inge Woudstra, and I work as a gender diversity consultant. This really means that I help organizations to recruit more women, retain women, and make sure that women move up at the same rate as men do. So, I mean, I do consulting, workshops, training, strategy consulting, and especially in tech and engineering, because my own background is working in Siemens and Shell. So that seemed to naturally fit with other organizations working in the industry. I used to work in strategy and organizational change consulting, moved to corporate responsibility, and then ended up in working with women, and from there working with organizations back again. About 3 years ago, so I've been doing that for 10 years, and about 3 years ago, I started these Gender Smart Talks, just little meetings in the city with people that I knew that worked in this area, because I was really keen to stay in touch with them. And, you know, it can be quite lonely when you're a consultant on your own, a freelancer. So I started inviting people that I knew that I thought, oh, it would be so cool if this person would meet this person. And we'd get together and share experiences. And that has grown over the last couple of years into a monthly meeting and virtual meet, and some in real life in the city still, 4 times a year, and a number of times a year here online, and this time with our first guest. So very excited to have you here. Karina, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Karina Govindji, Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Vodafone, and Group Head means globally. And why I invited her is because I was really impressed with her approach. She's been 4 years in a role, and the approach she uses that I know about at Vodafone is the setting of targets, researching where they are at the moment, doing a proper diagnosis, looking what needs to happen, and then getting a proper budget and actually start putting the measures in place to achieve that. And what I'm learning during the pre-interview is that that is also giving results. So I would love to hear about those today. And the sort of results that Vodafone is getting is they're winning awards. I mean, they're one of the top 25 companies to work for in the Sunday Times list. They have a very ambitious goal, Best Employer for Women by 2025. They're in the Times top 50 for women. They've been winning 2 years in a row there, or in the top 50. And at the moment, they already have, no, I'm not saying that right. Their goal is to have 45% female representation on the board. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. So sorry, Karina here, correct me, is 45% female representation on the board right now, and their aim is 50%. So really getting there already. So format today is there's half an hour interview. So I've got a couple of questions here for Karina, and then we'll open up the floor, and you can unmute yourself and let us know your questions. So in the meantime, just please stay on mute and listen in. We will be recording today, so afterwards you will be receiving the recording as well. Love to start with you then, Karina. Love to hear a bit about your background. I mean, what did you do before coming in diversity and inclusion, and how did you end up choosing that path?
Sure, I'm happy to share that. I mean, I've actually been in this role at Vodafone as the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion for 4 years. I mean, I guess if I take you back, I mean, I did started my degree in social and political science, actually focusing my thesis on gender equality at university, and really understanding organisations and behaviour was part of my studies. I then spent 7 or 8 years in retail, you know, on a kind of typical graduate scheme, trying out various roles, ending up in human resources for the latter years of that. And from there, I joined Gallup, a consultancy firm, where I really focused on consulting with clients about how you leverage human behavior in the workplace. How do you really get the most from individuals? What does employee engagement mean, and how do we help drive that? And that is what sort of led me into, I guess, back to diversity from my studying days, because I was going in presenting to FTSE 100 companies, largely to their executive teams, who were, by and large, largely men, talking about engagement and how engaged they were as teams and what they needed to do to drive that through the organisation. And I really saw a significant difference in the quality of those discussions. If there was even one woman in the room, it was often the HR director.
Yeah.
But by God, if there were two women, wow, the conversation really started to shift in terms of the degree of honesty and the exposure and where we were able to take those discussions. So I personally started to sort of research and be curious about the lack of diversity and the impact and the power when there were different voices around the table. So that's probably how I then made my way to Vodafone to oversee their global diversity agenda. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And sort of the role at Vodafone, was that indeed your first D&I role then?
It was, and I know sort of people who've been D&I experts for many years, whereas I came more from a consulting and influencing the business, and using that consulting background in order to build the diversity agenda at Vodafone.
So tell me, how did that go when you first started? So how did you start in that role, and what projects came after that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'd say is that it wasn't, my joining wasn't the start of the journey.
Right.
In many respects. I mean, Vodafone has been on a journey for over 10 years. I actually had the same CEO for 10 years who had made it his personal passion and commitment to drive gender equality. He himself had come, had been part of a startup company early in his career that was very gender balanced and very successful. And so, when he became chief executive officer of Vodafone, despite the fact that it, was 130,000 people and, across 30 countries, he genuinely believed the same model should apply. Why should there not be equality? And so there has been a 10-year journey of passion and commitment, and I joined as part of that journey. And part of what I've done over the 4 years is help, progress that agenda to, obviously, what you talked about. Our ambition is to be, the world's best employer of women by 2025.
Mm-hmm. And what were you, so did you join a larger team when you started?
Yeah, our diversity team is really very small. It's 2 people, and I think that's quite important to say, because often people feel that large companies can do things because they've got massive teams and massive budgets. So I just want to dispel that myth. There's 2 of us, sort of, we've had ad hoc graduate resource or interns, but managing an agenda across 30 countries, across all the pillars of diversity. And I think that's the reason I want to sort of say that is it's possible to do progressive things even with little resource, but also that relying on, our networks and talent within the organization. People come forward about diversity because they're passionate. So whether it's someone from the LGBT community that says, how can I help? Or whether it's a woman that says, I really want to do something, or someone from an ethnic minority background. And I think part of our role is to leverage that discretionary effort from people when you haven't got a large resource team.
Yes, so how do you get all those people to do things? Because, you can't do it all on your own. So I'm imagining you do engage them and give them tasks, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one is that there's whilst we're in a global role, each country has a dedicated and actually has a resource for diversity, not dedicated in terms of that's 100% their role, but within their role, it's clear that diversity and inclusion is, and they sit within HR, they're accountable within HR. It very much, the ownership of diversity and inclusion is felt within that country. So each country knows it's responsible. And that's been deeply embedded, and I can't sort of emphasize enough the role that leadership has played, from the top down, to make sure that the CEO and the leadership of each country feels ownership for the diversity and inclusion agenda. So those individuals who have it as part of their responsibility work with their local leadership teams to make sure that that agenda is lived and breathed and, you know, in that country. And they are part of our sort of champions network. So our role from a global perspective is to set the strategy, to provide research, to provide thought leadership, and to create bold policies and programs that those countries can implement. But there's a lot that they drive themselves.
Yes, so the countries individually, craft the policies to fit within that country, so it implements in their country.
We also take the approach of some bold global policies, though. So we were the first company, Vodafone, in 2015 to introduce a global maternity policy. At the time, it was all very local legislation. You know, your maternity leave would be based on whatever the country legislation. And so we had, you know, operations in the US where they would give, you know, 8 weeks maternity leave, and that was considered a norm. And we really broke that pattern. And we're really pleased that we broke that. So many other companies followed by breaking that pattern and setting then a global standard. So I think that's also part of the responsibility of a team, is to understand what bits need to be localized, but where you can have the power and influence to create more positive change by making a global policy.
Now, the interview today is obviously not about DNIY, but very much about how you achieve 30% women in senior leadership roles. So, I mean, is this where you are today, 30% women in senior leadership roles?
Yeah, we're actually at 31%. And that's our about our top 6,000 to 7,000 employees. The numbers of employees change because we have, you know, various acquisitions or demergers and mergers happening. But we have around 100,000 employees, and about our top 6%. We're at 31%. You know, we've also got over 30% on our exco, so our top board. Our target was set for 2020, but we did get to that 31% in December 2018, which is fantastic. But we know there's still more work to do, and if I'm honest, you know, there's areas, it's not as though we're 30% in every function. You can imagine our technology is still underrepresented. So part of our goal is to make sure that everyone gets to to the aspiration in each country and functionally as well. But setting the next goal, 40% by 2030. So just to put into context, that's saying, you know, we need to achieve 1% increase on our female representation each year, which may not sound a lot, but actually there's a lot of effort that goes into doing that, and maintaining the momentum that we've had over the last 10 years is going to require the same, if not more, if not more, more effort.
And I mean, where did you start? How long did it take to achieve the 30%?
Yeah, so in that, in 2010, we were at 23% in that population. So that's how we've grown. So I'd say, you know, approximately about a percentage a year is on average the progress that we've made.
And that you're still hoping to make then, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, how did you, was it what you said 2010, right? So how at 2010 you set this target, then how did you decide what you were going to do first? I mean, there are so many things you can do.
Yeah, and I'll sort of, I guess, take you through it, even though I wasn't there at the time. But one of the key things was leadership, you know, making this a priority, and then setting targets. So at the time, targets were set for each individual, each director, and they were very simple targets that people could understand. So what role they needed to play as a leader. So we called it a +1 target. And the goal of each director was that they had to have +1. So one more woman on their leadership team, so on their direct team each year until they got to 50%. And they were measured against how they were performing against this +1 target. And that was quite an effective way for us to sort of start off. We did that for about five years of the 10-year journey. And then latterly, we moved to more of an approach of an overall percentage representation. Still making it clear how many additional women were required to meet that, but you know, the target, for example, of 30% was set rather than the +1.
So when you give
Targets was
people a
the
target
first
of
thing.
+1, Karina, I mean, do you know what kind of support do they get to achieve that, or do you really leave that to individual leaders to decide how on their team they're going to get to the +1?
Yeah, no, part of our role is to provide the research and tools. So one of the areas, for example, that we focused on is the creation, understanding. Initially, we were just doing unconscious bias. So we were saying, look, if we train everyone on unconscious bias and they'll be more aware of it, we'll be in a better place. But of course, like all the research says, and like we discovered, the training itself isn't going to change behavior. So we continue to believe in training, but we accompany that with structural process changes. So debiasing tools, so recruitment. If you take the +1, the idea of having trying and piloting different tools to support our recruitment fair processes has been an important driver. Setting standards. We moved from needing to have women on a shortlist, broadly a few years ago, to saying at least one woman on the shortlist. We then, always review research, and research found if you have one woman on a shortlist, statistically, the chances of hiring them are zero. You need a minimum of 2, otherwise it doesn't change mindset. And then, in some cases now we've moved to needing gender balanced shortlists. So 50% women on shortlist, and we've also, in our very senior roles, we require that a woman is brought to an interview. So the most qualified woman and the most qualified man both have to come for an interview. So all of that's about changing perceptions.
And you mentioned debiasing tools. I'm sure not everyone knows what that is about. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, for us, that's more about piloting different ways that there may be bias built into recruitment processes. So whether that's from an attraction point of view, what images are we using to attract people, and do we need to alter the images so that they appeal both to men and women? The language in our job adverts, is it gender neutral, or are we using words that attract more men, or masculine, what they call masculine coded words? We've piloted blind CVs in some cases, making sure that, there's, if there's a panel, that there's a gender mix or a diverse mix, not just gender, on interview panels. So I'm just throwing out a number of things, but those for us are all part of, trying to take some bias that may be in the recruitment process out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so overall, what actions that you take? You've mentioned some, but I know you have a beautiful slide showing everything you're doing at the moment. Do you want me to pull that up, or are you happy to put it up?
Sure. Yep. If you want to do that, that's great.
So this is this is, I think, all your actions you're currently taking. Is that right?
Yeah. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, I can see people nodding. So good.
Brilliant. So yeah, and I won't go through this in detail, but what you see at the top is the idea that we've sort of said, actually, you need to support to achieve gender equality, to get our ambition of becoming the world's best employer. We need to segment women rather than say, everything is just for all women. Actually, what young girls need, in order to consider STEM, for example, is different to, if you become, a graduate, is different to if you're a young mother, and that's different if you've taken a career break. That there are different phases of life, and that we want to support women at all the phases. So at the top you see the journey of different phases, and at the bottom is the cultural what we call, creating the culture of belonging. So, helping women belong through things like networks, through coaching, through providing flexible working. All of those things are, for us, important enablers. Where the top policies are great, but they won't help us progress gender equality if the right conditions aren't in place environmentally.
Okay, so can you say a bit more about that? So the top policies are it's about flexible working and supporting women through the different life stages. Because I know a lot of companies say, oh yeah, we're introducing flexible working, and we're doing some unconscious bias training, and then we're done. So you're finding you need to do more. Can you say a bit more about that then?
Yeah, so So, like I said, I think the two need to work together. So, I mentioned, for example, if you have, you can have fantastic programs. A lot of companies have now to bring young girls into, to get them more familiar with STEM. So we have a program called Code Like a Girl. Over 1,000 girls each year are exposed to STEM, through a coding workshop. And we have a program, a returners program. So we committed to bring 1,000 women back to work who've taken career breaks. And what I was saying is those programs are great, but you at the same time need to work on unconscious bias, on process design, and those things in order that your programs can thrive.
Yeah, and I noticed women leadership programs isn't on there. Is that so? I mean, because I know. Personally, I'm not a great fan of those, and I noticed you don't have it on there. Is that what you find? Does it not work? Or?
Yeah, if I'm honest, we at Vodafone have taken a slightly different approach to women leadership programs. What we've done is try to always ensure that any programs we have are gender balanced or even over-index women, rather than segregating women on women-specific development programs. That's historically been the global approach. So for over 10 years, we've been ensuring that we've got 50% of female graduates on the program in every country that we operate in, which isn't always easy, but we make sure that happens. Our talent programs, we've always strived, even if we're under index on women, there need to be 50% of women in the program. So disproportionately more women would get on our talent programs from the pool population in order to meet that threshold. We have experimented with women leadership programs just in the last 12 months, because we've been saying, look, we're moving at a percentage a year, but are we missing anything? A lot of companies are doing them. Could that help, women to progress to the next level? It's too early for us to comment in terms of the success of those, because ultimately the success for us would be their promotion, progression to the next level. But the feedback is actually what's most helpful is the coaching element of those programs. So, whether or not that needs to be part of a separate program, or whether it's just about, ensuring that women get coaching support, is what we need to think about.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot on here. Is there one that you're sort of most proud of that you can give us a bit more detail on? One innovative one, exciting one?
Yeah, I probably would like to mention the domestic violence and abuse policy, because I think, people think that's a little bit unusual, and often kind of wonder, well, why would that be on here? Why is, that about gender, from a HR perspective, why is that important? And Vodafone is a technology company that has had for a number of years, through its foundation, been supporting victims of domestic violence and abuse through its apps and technology. So, making sure that women and men are safe. But what we embarked on over the last year is really researching actually the impact of people facing domestic violence and abuse while they're at work. And it really the external research that we did really did highlight, that 1 in 3 women who are working, so this is working population, women at all levels, management through to frontline, have experienced some kind of domestic violence and abuse, and 2/3 of them say, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and 2/3 of them say that it impacted their career progression. And so for a company that wants to be the best employer of women, or for any company that wants to really care about women, we really felt like addressing domestic violence and abuse was important, that this wasn't something that we could say, oh, it's just something that happens to people at home and we shouldn't be getting involved. Actually, we do need to be getting involved, because it impacts work, it impacts their ability to progress their careers, it impacts their ability to be productive. 1 in 10 women leave work because of the situation they're in, and economic empowerment is a key way to enable people to be free of abuse. So we launched this year a policy of 10 days paid leave for victims of domestic violence and abuse, our employees who are victims, as well as a number of support tools, so training of managers, a toolkit, etc. So I put that out there because I think it's this is not something that costs a lot of money, But I think, it's legislation in some countries. So in New Zealand, every organisation has to have a policy like this. But I think there's an opportunity for small, medium, large-sized companies to think about this.
And from what I'm hearing there, Karina, so when you do a new policy, basically you get some information from the women or the leaders in your organisation, say, where you sort of get input from them, finding, oh, there's actually something else here that's holding women back. Then you start thinking, what can we do about this? Is that indeed the process? And then you come up with a policy. Is that sort of...
Yeah, there's a few stages. So one is we do internal research, and because we're lucky enough to be in a number of countries, we often find that some country is doing something fantastic to address a problem we think is there. They've already identified. So in the case of domestic violence and abuse, Vodafone Australia and New Zealand had already implemented a policy a few years ago because they really recognised that this was a problem. You take the same example of our returners programme. So we launched a global programme to bring women back from career breaks, women and men. And Ireland had already created a fantastic returners programme. So we do internally identify what is the challenge. We use data to help sort of refine what the challenge is. We then look at our own company and say, where might we be, what's bucking the trend, which country is doing better, and let's be curious about what they're doing. But the other angle that we do is that we always externally research. So we want to validate what the impact is. And so, if I give you an example with the returner program, we asked KPMG to do analysis on women who've taken career breaks around the world. And they identified a pool of 50 million women of management level and above who are currently on career breaks. That's 50 million women. Now, that isn't for Vodafone alone, clearly. Yeah, we're not going to find opportunities. And of course, that 50 million women, not all of them are wanting to get back to work. Not all of them could get back to work. But the idea of external research is it presents a scale of opportunity that we then hope other companies will follow. Gender equality is not going to be achieved by one company doing one great thing. It has to be a collective effort.
Now, this all sounds like super easy, a lot of work, obviously. You have to research it properly. But I mean, what sort of barriers do you come across? Like, let's say for the domestic violence and abuse policy, is that something that you come up with it gets readily accepted, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, I think it would be very misleading of me to say these things were easy. Even, in fact, something like domestic violence and abuse, even when there's not a big cost implication, there's a lot of fear. And often, if I'm honest, the fear comes from HR. It's not always the business. It's HR wanting to, also, to do the right thing. So with something like domestic violence and abuse, the concerns were, gosh, what do we know about this? Should we really be kind of interfering or getting involved? Could we make the situation worse for individuals because our managers might not know how to deal with, situations? So often, the fear comes from the right place of wanting to do the right thing. But the same with the returners program. The challenges is, if they've taken a career break, fundamentally what we didn't have is an issue with people believing it was the right thing to do, but there's concerns about, well, how would we assimilate women back into the workplace? How do we help them be successful? And so it's having to understand and listen to some of the resistance. Sometimes there are cost challenges. So I won't say, cost isn't a challenge. With our global maternity policy, not only were we increasing the number of weeks leave, but we have a policy that we brought in 5 years ago that when women return to work, they get paid 5 days a week, but they work 4 days a week. Yeah, so you get an extra day's pay for 6 months. And in that the idea of that 6 months is it allows you to phase back in. You get a day at home without any financial impact, but on the individual, but of course, that has impact on the organisation. So I'm not saying that there aren't.
So what do you do to get these people on board then? What kind of, when people do ask those questions, even if they are from a good place, they may say, oh, that doesn't work in my country, or gosh, from an HR perspective, this is very risky, and what are the legal consequences? So how do you get these people on board? Because there's only two of you.
Yeah, no, but we do have to be probably a little bit challenging, and there's only two of us, but once you get leadership bought into it, it does make these things easier. And I think the other thing is, if you set yourself out to be ambitious, when we get people to agree, well, we do want to be the world's best employer of women, right? And everyone goes, yes, that sounds really good. Well, then we have to prove it. We can't just say it. We have to prove that maternity policy, or we're going to bring to do difficult things. So I think putting out bold ambitions helps sort of pull people to then doing things that might be more challenging. And I think the other thing is having data to help drive the decision. So if you take something like the maternity, whilst we have 100,000 employees approximately now, that's about, we have about 1,000 to 1,500 women taking maternity leave each year. And then you present the cost to business, when we lose women. So they go on maternity leave and they don't return because actually we haven't created the right conditions. And then you look at the cost of that versus, having them work, 4 days a week, but paying them 5. These things then become much more obvious because the benefits outweigh the cost.
So you have, what it sounds like to me, you have a lot of data in your mind or at your fingertips, and you have a lot of conversations with individuals, right? Is that how it works?
Yes, exactly.
Or do you also ask, I can imagine, could you also ask other people to have this conversation? So would you pick up the phone to the CEO or the CEO in a particular country and say, gosh, we're having an issue here, can you help? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, if we were getting stuck in a particular country and we know we've got the CEO support, then it may be the CEO, global CEO to a CEO of a country. If it's got to the point where we really can't move forward, then that conversation is always helpful. I mean, we'd always leave that to a last resort. And usually I have to say our HR directors are very supportive, and they help to then influence the business in their countries to adopt the global policies.
So lots of questions from me, but it is time to open up to everyone else as well. So if you have turn on your videos if you have one, and otherwise you'll just have to, and then you can put up your hand if you have a question. There is also the chat, which you can open up by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking a chat icon, which also says chat. So if you don't get, just shout out in the chat and say, I want to say something, and I can direct the conversation to you as well. Yeah, and remember, when you want to say something, you have to unmute yourself, which is at the bottom of the image where you see yourself. There is an unmute thing. Oh, at the right top hand, actually, sorry. Mine is at the bottom, but for you it's at the right top hand. So who's got a question for Karina?
Hey.
Mindy, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mindy Gibbons-Klein, Managing Director at Panoma Press, Inge's publisher, actually.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned my book. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, so this is my book. Yeah.
It could be
published by Mindy. Yeah.
So, we have a very good reputation as publishers of business books and personal development books. I noticed last year that the balance is not right with business and personal development books, especially business and leadership books out in the market, predominantly by middle-aged white men. So I did some studies, some surveys, some thinking, and in January of this year, Panoma made a commitment that in 2019, 80% of our books will be authored by people from underrepresented groups. Wow. So this is very exciting, and we've had a lot of support from our team, from our authors. We've had press coverage, but also the haters have come out of the woodwork. And, they've said things like, what about the white men? And now you're doing positive discrimination. So does that happen also at Vodafone? And how do you cope with it?
Yeah, that unfortunately, I think is a perennial problem. And when, we've been very bold about having women's targets and having a women's strategy. And in fact, one of the challenges actually was that our diversity agenda, when I took it on, was almost synonymous with women. So gender had become so much the focus that feeling was there. I think broadening the agenda for us has been really helpful. So LGBT, as an example, embracing the LGBT community and making that very much part of our our approach, and and addressing race and disability. All of those are helpful because they reduce some of the tension around a kind of men versus women type of approach. There also, if I'm honest, there are times where we've had to be quite unforgiving about saying, yes, we have we have to focus on this because actually, if you see the evidence, if we did nothing, this, the organization would be dominated by white males. That's what history tells you. And so, the fact that the organization has started to shift is only because structural changes have been required to create action. And I think that's where some of these unconscious bias training, or if any of you use the Harvard IAT implicit assumption test, but getting people to, acknowledge their own biases, to then say, well, imagine these compounded in an organization. You have to bring in structural change. So we're a little bit, unapologetic about saying we have to put tension in the system, otherwise our organization will always look how it always looked.
And widening the agenda. Yeah, that's a nice answer, Karina. Monica has a question. Monica, please open your mic and let us know your question. Monica, no? Yeah, there she is.
Yeah, well, I've been working for diversity and inclusion for at least 7 years now. I take a break right now for doing my master's degree. And what I would like to ask is, what would be your main advice for those who are working for diversity and inclusion to move the needle and make real changes? Because as you said before, this needs to be, we need to make global changes in order to have gender balance. So what would be your main advice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. Honestly, in my experience, this is going to sound very simplistic. I'll maybe sort of give two answers, or a twofold answer. One is that I see too many organizations or too many diversity experts having to get caught up into proving a business case, which I think detracts from actually doing real things to create change. So my advice would be, get buy-in from, the most senior person you can in the organization who believes that this is the right thing to do without needing a business case. And I understand that that's not always possible in some organizations, it's like, and we're a data-driven organization, don't get me wrong, but we had philosophical belief that we needed to, this is the right thing to do without needing to prove that, a more diverse team, we never talk about the, any of the business benefits. We assume them. And that means we've been able to do much more action, I think. So that's one part, is not to get bogged down in the business case. And the second part is, quite honestly, as a diversity lead, I think you have to experiment. There is, if we'd have found a silver bullet, one of us, would have found it and would all be happy days. There isn't one. So just needing to keep experimenting, trying different things will work in different areas at different times, in different cultures. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
Oh, well, good. And we're moving on to Rachel. Rachel, you have a question too. So remember to unmute when you ask your question.
Hiya, yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, super, thank you.
Hey, cool. So Karina, thank you. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed that. And it sounds like you're doing so much at Vodafone. I'm really impressed.
And let us know what you do, Rachel.
Yeah. So I am leading on diversity and inclusion at Atos.
Right.
We're an IT company. We work with Vodafone actually. So it's nice to hear from you directly. And this kind of links a little bit to the answer that you were talking about in the beginning around the positive discrimination piece, but you were talking about kind of widening it to other diversity characteristics. So I wanted to ask, do you do anything specifically in terms of intersectionality? So are you looking at, for example, supporting women from a BAME background? Is there anything you guys do there?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you asked, actually, because I usually, when people sort of say, well, what's next for you, or what are your challenges? I think that's an area that we haven't addressed very well, if I'm honest. We had a very focused women's strategy, and then we built other, the success of that around and replicated that around other agendas. And we have some examples of intersectionality. So, for example, you know, we have a women's group that's an LBT group. So, you know, part of the LGBT community have come together with women and said, how do we build that? We have some bridges happening between our multicultural network and the LGBT community. But if I'm honest, I think that they are early stages and not really at the heart of a truly intersectional approach. Yeah, that's where I think we've got more work to do.
I think it's an important piece. I think we're in a similar position. I'd say we originally started with a quite heavy focus on gender, and we're now starting to expand more and doing things where we're trying to support more young women from different ethnic backgrounds and stuff into the organisation. So I think it's a real challenge, and it links again to making sure that we're not, you know, I think somebody's put another question about skeptics and stuff like that, and it's a challenge. So it's interesting. Thank you.
And then on the chat, a question came in from Jessica Chivers. If you're still there, Jessica, let me see if you're still there. No, I think she had to drop off the call, but she was keen for us to ask this question. Jessica Chivers, she works, she's a colleague of mine, basically. She works with women returners and with organizations creating more diversity. And she says a lot of my clients want to know, how did you win over reluctant senior employees? Have you any examples of people moving from being skeptical to advocates?
Yes, so I would say, I mean, there's a couple of things here, and I'm conscious that when I say these, not all of them are replicable. Yeah, so I know that's not always helpful, but that's the honest truth. One of the things that went in our favor was having a CEO who was absolutely committed, who made it very clear that this was part of what he believed in and he expected others to believe in. And there was a pressure put by him to the business to ensure that, you know, that women's representation, for example, was taken seriously. And he made that very public and vocal. And so, you know, that creates a sort of tension where, you know, you can be a great performing business leader, but actually if you've got a very poor diverse mix in your team, you're not going to be given the full kind of, you know, respect and credibility in the business.
So can you say, what did he do? I mean, did he expose these people on stage, or did
he would call them out. So we also use events to kind of create moments. So International Women's Day each year, and he would be very bold about saying, these are the countries that are over 30%. These are the countries I want to see more from. So he would publicly sort of, and that the CEOs in those countries, and you know, that becomes very personal. He would visit those countries with a specific agenda around when they're under 30% or they were not meeting target. And he'd say, I want to meet the women in these markets and hear from them. And the leadership weren't allowed to be in those meetings. So he was talking to the women and what the challenges were. And then he would make sure he spoke to the leadership team afterwards and said, this is what I'm hearing to your women. And then he would do, like, when he does it, you know, usually when they visit, they then do a kind of town hall, so, you know, that where lots of questions about the business, etc. And always he would say, and I've spoken to your leadership team and we need more, you know, women coming forward. And so there's kind of pressure put at different levels, but it creates a sense of, as a leader in the business, oh God, I really got to do something about this, because this is not making me look good. So if I'm honest, ego is a fantastic driver for change in this agenda. And I say that on the negative. What I've just described is more of a stick approach, you know, if you're not doing well. But on the carrot side, we are part of the He for She program, the UN Women, which is all about men advocating for gender equality. And we have helped make men in our business famous for being real he for she champions. They look good, the CEO knows about them, they are driving, you know, fantastic change. So when I say ego, I mean it in both senses. You know, if you've got the opportunity to make people look good, then absolutely it may sometimes have to be more of the stick approach.
And the carrot approach that I really like that you mentioned, is that something your CEO himself also does actively, sort of like calling out those countries that are doing well, or, yeah, giving people, I don't know, rewards, bonuses. Is this a part of your?
Yeah, we've never linked it with financial, but if I give you an example, so I mean, we host our International Women's Week. The event is hosted each year, and the CEO is the host. It's a big event, and thousands of people join, and he will only go and he will choose a country where he wants to be in to kind of host that from, and that will always have to be an overrepresented women's market. So last year he went to Ireland. In Ireland we have over 50% on the management team. We have a woman CEO. I mean, Ireland and that's, it's Ireland Vodafone, so it's full technology. Every area of Ireland is gender balanced, and so really symbolic that he goes there, and he made a big point of celebrating the CEO and their achievements, and he would absolutely not do that with a market that was underrepresented in women.
Yeah, and we have a question from Anita, and Anita, you've just dropped sort of out of the video. You can see your tummy, which is lovely, but remember to unmute. And if there's any more questions, we do have time for a few more, so do come in.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anita. Thank you very much, Karina. I joined about 10 minutes late, so I didn't catch the first part, but I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far. I also work for Atos. I work closely with Rachel, and I'm leading on our gender programme. And my experience so far in Atos is the executive, our board on the whole get it and are very committed to gender balance. And we've got employees at all levels of the organisation who get it. I think the challenge is around really getting management and business ownership and educating and empowering managers. So my question, Karina, is I noticed on your slide you mentioned gender smart training. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, and also what you've done to really get business ownership and get management buy-in. By that I mean people management.
Yeah, the middle management, right?
Middle management, yes,
so the
exactly.
all involved, but then how do you get the layers below that?
Exactly.
Actually do this, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can say a little bit about Gender Smart, but I'm sure Inge's also the expert on this, so I'm sure she can follow up as well. But I mean, this interestingly actually came out of, again, when you visit different countries, you sort of hear what some of the challenges were. And our India business that has had a real challenge with getting good female representation in leadership. A lot of the men were actually expressing, just the difficulty that they were having in managing women. They were saying not because the women were difficult, but it was new for them because they'd been used to sort of essentially managing all male teams. And you kind of combine that with, the research about women receiving less feedback, for example, because men are, male managers are more fearful of giving women feedback, so they give all the great developmental feedback to men about what they can be doing better. Women don't get the feedback, and then, suddenly you see men getting their promotions because their path has been guided better. So there's a lot of research, again, confidence, so women's ability to put their hand up for promotion, to talk about I rather than we. So we know all of these things exist. So we have packaged that in a training to help managers, male and female managers, just understand actually the gender differences that those exist, but how to be gender smart about them. But I'm sure Inge might want to follow up in a second as well. And then your second question is about middle management. Again, I wouldn't say that we've fully cracked this, but target setting, is at the top, and then it cascades, so that impacts, managers all throughout the business. And so that's been really helpful. I think what we then do, our sort of our approach to unconscious bias is we present real life scenarios. So we use video techniques to show examples of how bias plays out that managers can relate to, like, oh God, that's a situation I've really been in, rather than it just being about leadership issues. But I think there is, again, I think there's more that we could do to bring that accountability, much more granular to a manager.
Yeah, and to add to that, yeah, it's pretty much what I do a lot with leaders, Karina, as you say, gender smart training programs. So that is about getting both male and female managers to see that there are, yeah, that the typical way of how we think leaders should behave is a male way. So regardless of whether you're a male or a female, that is what you think a leader should be doing. And to actually allow female leaders to have a more cooperative style if that suits them, and for their leaders to see that also. So that's what I do in my workshops for them, yeah, working with them to get them to see what they need to do to make sure women move up, and that often is something else than what you need to do to encourage men to move up. So we do work on that. Want to open up there to the people who can't do the chat and aren't on video, so I can't see their hands raised. We've got a couple of people I can just see a phone number or a number. If you have a question, there's a few more minutes. Go ahead. Unmute yourself. No questions here. Okay, that's all right, because I have a few more questions to finish off, Karina. I would love to ask you, and you've given us a little bit of that, but I'd love to know more of, now that you have more gender balanced teams, and over the last 4 years, you have seen with your +1 strategy and then the 30% strategy, you have seen teams become more gender balanced. What does that mean? Can you see an impact? What changes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the numbers is one thing. I have to say the thing that has shifted, and I wouldn't want to say over 4 years, but maybe over 10 years, is that's obviously what we're all striving for, is that change in culture. So when you look at, you know, the description of how Vodafone would have been over 10 years ago, it was much more of a macho culture. You know, and we've had to make, you know, changes in even, you know, the way that events are celebrated, for example. You know, if you've got, you know, a whole load of men and it's a sales, you know, team meeting, for example, you know, some of the, you know, the ways in which those events would have happened wouldn't have been conducive to women feeling comfortable. And now, as those teams are now getting to a third women, there's a natural change in how those happen, and that evolution, which then helps to create really just a different type of culture of acceptance. So, you know, the women that we have in leadership roles are not, you know, one type of woman, it's not, you know, macho type. And I say that because I think that when women are in a minority, and, you know, we see 30% kind of as a tipping point. I'm sure you get to 50%, it really would feel different. But it definitely culturally feels like a much more inclusive place. And I think our LGBT community are really helpful in a benchmark on that as well, because I think that's a really difficult area of acceptance still in many of the countries we operate in. But we're really hearing wonderful feedback from them about just a greater level of acceptance and feeling like they belong, which I think is a good testimony to the culture is, you know, is becoming more inclusive. So I think that would be probably, it's hard to measure. If you look at our scores on a people survey, for example, we ask about diversity inclusion, we always tend to score quite high. So I don't want to just look at measures like that, because I think sometimes people don't always tell, you know, the truth for various reasons. But the fact that it feels different for some minority groups, I think, is really important.
So is that because of having more women, there is more openness to other diversity groups? Is that what you see?
Yeah, and well, we've also so it's just having so, and we've always believed actually that if you know, have a gender strategy, it benefits everyone. Yeah? So you have something like flexible working, which we have embedded now in all of the countries that we operate in, and everyone takes up flexible working. Yeah? So you may have initiated it because you know that you need it to attract women, or, you know, millennials, but actually the benefits are men and women equally use it, and that's fantastic. So all of these things, I think, help to shift the culture.
And do you also measure the impact on results? I know that Sodexo, for instance, they have like the productivity they measure in each team, and they then verify that against gender balance, and they find that more gender balanced teams are more productive. Do you have measurements like that in place?
Yeah, this goes to what I was speaking about earlier. We don't, and we will intentionally not do that, right. Because, you know, again, remember, to do that takes quite a lot of effort and analysis. Yeah. And what you're doing there is proving what we believe already is, you know, more balance is going to lead to better business results. So we really, philosophically don't believe in investing time and resources in demonstrating that diversity has an impact.
Yeah. And Monica has another question. Come in, Monica, before I throw my last one in. I'm sure we have time for yours as well.
Thank you. What would you say would be like the main paradigms that women and men can have regarding reaching the 30% of women in leadership positions?
Sorry, I may not have heard that. What's the real
paradigms? I'm not sure what you mean there. So the kinds of things people think about when you say we're reaching 30%?
That's right.
The kind of responses you get from other people. Because I was wondering that, Karina, when you said 50%, maybe that helps you answer this question. I thought, gosh, does that scare some man? You know, do they? Exactly. Oh God, 50%. That looks, and it looks like a lot, right? When we see 50% women in a room, a lot of people think that you're inundated with women, and they don't realize 50% is still male, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have and again, you might have noticed our goal is not 50% because we are not seeing 50% of people entering the industry. So if we said, well, we want 50% in management roles, but our workforce is only 40%, you know, I think that does call into question, well, how are we going to that's essentially over-indexing women. So I think, you know, we always want to be seeing women as proportionate, so women leaders as proportionate to the representation of the community. And then we have to continue to reinforce the best person for the job. Yeah, so we have some beliefs, we call them the diversity and inclusion beliefs. There are 5 of them, and one of them is, you know, regardless of targets, it will always be the best person for the job. And so we have to keep reinforcing that. I'm not saying that, you know, people always believe it, and, you know, of course there might be some you know, skepticism around, but in our experience, you know, wavering on that isn't helpful for women or men.
And my last question then for you, Karina, where are you going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vodafone's got, like I said, you know, ambition to be the world's best, you know, best employer by 2025, and that's going to require, you know, ongoing effort, bold policies, and also just business as usual. Yeah, continuing to understand how you get the 1% increase per year. What you need to do structurally, you know, if you have headcount reductions, for example, how do you make sure that your women representation grows even though your headcount shrinks? So all of these are sort of challenges that we need to continue to meet. And I think, you know, the point earlier about intersectionality is really one that we have to get stronger at learning to deal with.
Yeah. And yeah, I want to really thank you for I found it really interesting, Karina, to hear your thoughts, the way you've been approaching this and making it all very real. I want to thank everyone else as well for coming to join us, coming on the call. It's been, really good to have you all here. We have been recording this, so you will find the recording in your inbox if you haven't been able to hear everything, want to listen to it again, or want to share it with other people. If you want to be invited to future events, sign up to my newsletter or just send me an email and I'll send you the link, because it'd be great to see you at future events and get to know you better, meet you in person, because the next event is 9th of July, 5:30 to 7:30. And we will be in the city then at Empiric Recruitment, which is near Bank Station. And we'll be talking about engaging man. So some questions about that today already. So we'll be saying more about that and sharing. We don't have a guest then, we'll be sharing experiences with people like you. What are you doing to engage man in your team? So hoping to see you there. Thank you all for coming, and many thanks to Karina.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.